Okay, now we're going to be looking at neutral questions and wish listing. These are two relatively simple techniques, but that doesn't affect how powerful they can be. So I'm going to demonstrate how powerful they can be through a number of examples. Neutral questions are about looking at a motion, and before you commit to either side, asking yourself what the motion requires you to do. So that means that you don't just jump to an argument that you immediately have, and this occurs quite a lot with people who've been debating for a little while where they're like, I know what this debate is about. And they just focus on answering their side of the debate without asking the bigger question. First, ask the question and understand the question before you jump to the answer. And neutral questions can have two different types. So I like to think of them as characterization questions, where you're asking about the core issues in the debate and just giving a good picture of what that looks like. And strategic questions, which is where you're going to answer and guide your strategic line. Wish listing then is kind of linked to that, which says, I wish I could prove X thing. So what it does is try and direct you towards most difficult to prove aspects within the debate, which are generally the most important aspects within the debate. Elements of a debate that are most difficult to prove are typically ones that you have to provide depth and spend time building up. And so they can't just be chucked in there with every other issue. And if you give equal time to issues that are very easy to prove and issues that are very difficult to prove, you stand to sell people on the stuff that's very easy to prove but not that important, but actually not spend enough time on the stuff that's really hard to prove and really important to winning the debate. So what wish listing does is it guides you directly towards the stuff that is hardest to prove, but that is also probably most important to you winning the debate. It doesn't mean that every single wish you have, especially if you're a very ambitious person, will always be something that you can prove within the debate. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to prove a specific element of the debate, but then you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware that that might be something that's important and that still rests on your opponent's side, and therefore you seek to neutralize it. So even in the case where you can't answer a wish with positive argumentation, you still need to be aware of it and be able to neutralize it in negative argumentation. Either way, wish listing guides you towards very strategically important elements within the debate. Now this seems kind of general, so what I'm going to do is run through a number of examples to demonstrate how this can operate in both giving you good clarity about the motion and also in terms of directing you towards what you probably should be trying to prove. So the first version we're going to do is this house supports the development of lethal autonomous weapons. Now, the very first question you should be asking is, what are lethal autonomous weapons? And secondly, what does the development of lethal autonomous weapons actually look like? So how is it being affected? Where within the progress of these weapons are we? So those would be two important things to talk about in characterization. When you're looking at that, a strategic question would be, what does lethal autonomous weaponry do for war? How does that affect war? Do we have more wars? How does it affect society? Then you get into the wish list side of it, which kind of directs you towards your important questions. So you might say, I wish I could prove that this is better for warfare, or I wish I could prove that this is better for society in general. Both of those things are quite difficult to prove parts to the topic, but they're also quite important to discuss because the development of lethal autonomous weapons is meaningfully impacting the way that we engage in warfare and how frequently you engage in warfare. And those two questions are very important to the debate. So you first got a picture of the debate, and then you've guided yourself towards the most important elements of that debate. Second example I'm going to do is this house believes that men should pay a gender tax. And here the characterization questions you should be asking are, why men? Why a gender tax? And the strategic question there would be, is government legitimate in imposing a tax on one gender in order to better uplift another gender? A wish list might be, I wish I could prove that it's men's obligation to pay for the upliftment of women. And there's analysis that you can do. In all cases, there's analysis that you can do, but you just need to be aware that you need to zone in on those difficult to prove elements. So I wish I could prove that it's men's obligation to pay a gender tax for our society. I wish I could prove that government is legitimate in taxing men in order to uplift women. Two very central questions to the debate. Okay, The third example is this house would use racial profiling in the fight against crime. And here you might say, what information do those police or security, international security, use in order to fight crime? How do they use that information? Those would both be characterization questions. And then the core question is whether or not this is legitimate information to use in the fight against crime. I wish I could prove that using this information isn't being prejudiced towards any group of people, isn't sort of being racist, and I think they're zoning right in on whether that is prejudice and how that works. It is really important to the debate. So you can kind of directly attack the emotive fuel that opposition is necessarily going to have about, violations of dignity, about the lack of fairness that exists within racial profiling. I think all of those elements can be really directly attacked if you talk about how this gives us on-the-ground information as opposed to people using their biases and using their own personal sort of lens to be the best police officer or law enforcement officer that they possibly can be. So here we use real information, it's real-time information, it's updated, and it's also reflective, so it means that you can kind of hold those biases to account based on information. Right, so you see you're directing immediately towards stuff that is difficult to prove, that you need to spend time proving, which is why you want the wish list to guide you directly to those issues. The fourth one I'm going to talk about is this house would invade Yemen. And here there's really only one question, which is when do we invade? Don't be afraid of single issue questions. Like if you can only think of one question, one big lens that has a lot of subcategories to it, that's absolutely fine. That's the metric by which you can evaluate the debate. We're going to be doing single issue versus multi-issue debates in a subsequent video, so do watch out for that. But it is perfectly fine to have a single question of the debate. So then once you have your single question, why do we invade countries? Then your wish list could say, I wish that I could prove that Yemen and the circumstance that's given to me fits the criteria for when we invade a country. And there you just direct towards fitting, both creating the metric for when we invade somewhere and also showing that Yemen fits that metric. Now you've got a really nice clean structure to your case. Final motion that I'm going to tackle is this house would torture suspected terrorists. A couple of characterization questions you might have is, what does this torture look like? Again, a spectrum exists of intensity and of harm. Secondly, what is the purpose of torture? So what does it seek to achieve? And thirdly, how effective is it at achieving its aims? So what are the actual outcomes of torture? The strategic question could be something like, what harms can the state impose on an individual in order to protect society? And there you have to say why it would be legitimate to impose seemingly significant harms on an individual for the protection of society. So your wish list would say, I wish I could prove that harming an individual in this way is justified in order to protect society, or in order to even increase the likelihood of being able to protect society. So that would be how you would construct the direction of that case. So as you can see, neutral questions and wish lists work in collaboration and conjunction. They're a really good start to understanding what obligations you have within a debate. That's all for neutral questions and wish listing. Thanks very much. Bye.